Fire tore through the left side of my ship before I even had time to strap into my seat. The silent current shook so hard that a tool cabinet broke loose from the wall and slammed into my shoulder, and I barely felt it because the alarms were screaming louder than my own thoughts. Every light on my console had turned red. Red meant we were dying. My name is Vex Kalor Thon, and I am an engineer of the Cathari fleet, though on that day I stopped believing engineering could save us. We were 5 ships running from a battle we had already lost, chased by Drathon compact raiders who wanted nothing more than to finish the job. Our formation had broken apart hours earlier. 2 ships were gone. I did not know if their crews had escaped or not, and there was no time to find out. I was strapped into the engineering deck, watching numbers fall apart on my monitor, when the captain's voice cracked through the comm system. "Vex, I need main power back. We cannot outrun them with half our engines burned out." "There is no main power to give you," I said, my hands moving faster than my mind could keep up. "The core is cracked. If I push it any harder, it will not matter whether the Drathons catch us. We will finish the job ourselves." Behind me, sparks fell from a ruptured conduit, and I threw myself sideways to avoid them, landing hard against the floor grating. My chest ached where the metal edge caught my ribs, but there was no time to check for damage. Every second I spent on myself was a second closer to losing the ship entirely. Through the narrow viewport above my station, I caught a glimpse of the void outside, streaked with weapon fire that lit the darkness in flashes of white and orange. Somewhere out there, our pursuers were closing the gap, and I understood, with a coldness that settled into my stomach, that we were not going to win this chase through skill or speed. We were going to win it, if we won it at all, by disappearing. There is a system ahead, called Orlan, our navigator, his voice tight and clipped the way it always went when he was frightened, but refusing to admit it. Small star, 1 planet with a breathable atmosphere. Scans show minimal technology. If we can reach it, we might lose them in the debris belt on the way in. "Do it," the captain ordered. "Vex, I need enough power to make the jump into that system and then land. That is all. After that, you can let the core rest." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Rest is generous. I will be lucky if it does not explode. I forced the last working relay to redirect power away from weapons, away from shields, away from everything except propulsion. The ship groaned like something alive and in pain, and for one long moment I was certain we would tear apart before we ever reached open space beyond the battle. Then, suddenly, the stars outside blurred, stretched, and the screaming of metal became the low hum of a jump drive working far beyond what it was built to survive. When the ship dropped out of the jump, silence replaced the alarms for exactly 3 seconds. Then new alarms began, quieter ones, warning of hull stress and failing life support instead of incoming fire. We had made it. For now. Below us hung a blue and green planet, wrapped in white clouds, spinning peacefully as if it had no idea what had just arrived in its sky. I stared at it through the cracked viewport, my hands trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion, and I thought, absurdly, that it was beautiful. It looked nothing like the burned and broken worlds I had grown used to seeing. "Atmosphere is breathable," Orlan confirmed, reading from his scanner. "Gravity is close to standard. Vex, can you get us down in 1 piece?" "1 piece is optimistic," I muttered, already recalculating what little control I had left over our descent. "I will aim for something soft to land on." We entered the atmosphere trailing smoke, the outer hull glowing orange from friction, pieces of loose plating tearing away behind us, like feathers shedding from a wounded bird. I gripped the edges of my console as the ship bucked and rolled, fighting me with every meter we dropped. Through the viewport, green land rushed up faster than I liked, crisscrossed with strange straight lines that I would later learn were roads. "Brace," I said, though I doubted anyone needed the warning. The impact threw me from my seat despite the restraints, my head cracking against the console hard enough that colored light burst across my vision. The ship skidded, metal screaming against soil and rock, throwing up a wall of dirt and broken trees before finally grinding to a stop at an angle that left the whole vessel tilted. For a moment there was nothing but ringing silence and the faint hiss of escaping gas somewhere below decks. "Report," the captain croaked over the comm, her voice rough with pain. One by one, the crew answered. Bruised, burned in places, but alive, all of us. I allowed myself exactly one breath of relief before the reality of our situation caught up with me. We were down, but we were far from safe. Our engines were destroyed, our weapons were gone, our shields did not exist anymore. If the Draythons had tracked our jump signature, if they knew where we had fled, then we were sitting on the ground of an unknown world with nothing to defend ourselves except whatever tools I could find in a wrecked engineering bay. I unstrapped myself and forced my legs to hold my weight, ignoring the sharp pain along my ribs. The corridor outside engineering was littered with debris, wires hanging from torn panels, emergency lights flickering weakly along the walls. I made my way toward the forward section, where the captain and Orlin were already gathered near a viewport, looking out at whatever lay beyond our broken hull. What I saw stopped me completely. We had not landed in some empty wilderness as our scans had suggested might be safest. We had landed near what could only be described as a settlement, larger and more developed than anything the survey had indicated. Structures rose in the distance, taller than anything I expected from a species our sensors had labeled primitive. Lights glowed along wide paths, where strange metal vehicles moved in orderly lines, and even from this distance, I could see shapes gathering near the edge of the crash site, drawn by the smoke still rising from our hull. "They have technology," Orlin said, disbelief coloring every word. "Ground vehicles, structured lighting. This does not match the survey data at all." "The survey was old," the captain said grimly. "It seems this world has grown since then." I felt my stomach tighten. A species with unexpected technology, arriving to find a crashed alien ship in what was probably their territory, was not a situation any protocol I knew of prepared me for. First contact was supposed to happen carefully, deliberately, with translators ready and diplomats leading the way. Instead, we had crash-landed in the middle of a war, bleeding fuel and secrets onto the ground of a world we knew almost nothing about. "Options," the captain said, looking at each of us in turn. "Quickly." "We could seal the hull and wait," Orlin offered. "Hope they leave us alone until we can repair enough to move." "With what parts?" I asked. "Our fabricators are damaged. Half our tools are buried under collapsed decking. We do not have the material to repair a ship this size on our own, not before the Draythons find us again." The captain exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a person takes when they are about to make a decision they do not fully trust. "Then we do not have a choice. We go out. We assess. If this species is hostile, we retreat back inside and seal every door we have left." I did not like it. Every part of my training told me that first contact handled this way was a disaster waiting to happen. But I also understood that we had no fuel, no shields, no weapons, and no time. Whatever waited outside our broken hull, we could not avoid it any longer. The exit ramp groaned as it lowered, metal scraping against metal from damage sustained in the crash. Cool air rushed in, carrying scents I had never experienced before, green and earthy and strange. I stepped down behind the captain, my hand resting near the emergency tool at my belt, the closest thing I had to a weapon. The crowd gathered at a distance had grown larger. I could see individuals of this species clearly now, tall in some cases, shorter in others, wrapped in clothing of every color imaginable, their expressions ranging from fear to open curiosity. Vehicles had stopped along the nearby paths, and more of them were arriving, flashing lights on their tops that pulsed red and blue. One figure stepped forward from the crowd before any of the others, a man with tired eyes and dirt already on his sleeves, as though he had been working outdoors before our arrival interrupted his day. He raised both hands slowly, palms open, a gesture that even without translation felt unmistakably peaceful. "You folks all right in there?" he called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground between us. I had no idea what the words meant. None of us did. But something about the tone, calm and steady, despite the impossible sight in front of him, eased just slightly the tight knot of fear sitting in my chest. The captain glanced at me, then back at the man. Translator status? Basic only, I admitted. Enough for simple exchanges if their language follows patterns similar to others we have cataloged. Give me a moment. I activated the small translation device mounted on my wrist, watching as it scanned the sounds around us, searching for patterns, roots, structure. It was slow, clumsy work, built for emergencies rather than fluent conversation, but it was all we had. The man took another step closer, moving carefully, the way someone might approach an animal they did not want to frighten. Behind him, more people were arriving, some in uniforms, others simply drawn by curiosity, forming a loose circle around the crash site without ever fully closing in. Careful, the captain warned quietly. We do not know their intentions. I studied the crowd as the translator worked, waiting for the device to catch enough words to form something usable. What struck me most was not fear in their faces, though there was certainly some of that. It was curiosity, sharp and unmistakable, the kind of look I had only ever seen on the faces of engineers, standing in front of a problem they desperately wanted to solve. None of them were running. None of them were reaching for weapons that I could see, though some of the uniformed figures carried tools at their sides that might have been exactly that. Instead, they watched us with the focused attention of people trying to understand something entirely new, and for the first time since the fire had torn through my ship, I allowed myself to wonder if perhaps we had not crash-landed into disaster after all. The translator chimed weakly, offering its first rough words. The man in front of us spoke again, slower this time, clearly noticing our hesitation. "You're safe here," the device translated, the words halting and imperfect but unmistakable in their meaning. "Whatever you need, we'll help." I looked at the captain. She looked back at me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke, because neither of us quite believed what we had just heard. We had come down out of the sky, broken and desperate, expecting at best indifference and at worst violence. Instead, a stranger on an unfamiliar world had just offered us help before we had even asked for it. The man who had spoken first introduced himself as Derek Whitfield, though it took the translator 3 attempts to render his name correctly, and even then the captain struggled to say it without adding an extra syllable. He turned out to be some kind of local official, though I would later learn his actual job had nothing to do with diplomacy or first contact. He managed road maintenance crews for the region, and he simply happened to be the closest adult with authority when a burning spaceship dropped out of the sky. That fact alone told me something important about this species. There was no elite team of specialists rushing in with careful protocols. There was a man in work clothes, followed by whoever else was nearby, walking straight toward a wrecked alien vessel because someone needed help, and he happened to be there. "We're going to need engineers," Derek said, once the translator had steadied enough for real conversation. "Real ones. Whatever's wrong with your ship, I can't fix it, but I know people who might understand parts of it. You would help repair a vessel from a species you have never encountered before this hour," the captain said carefully, still watching him for any sign of deception. Derek shrugged, an easy motion that seemed to carry no weight of suspicion at all. "You're stranded. Ship's broken. Seems like the kind of thing you help with first and ask questions about later." I did not understand this logic. Every protocol I had studied about unknown species emphasized caution above all else. Weeks of observation before any physical contact, months before offering resources or knowledge. Here was a man offering both within minutes of our arrival, based on nothing more than the simple fact that we appeared to need it. Within 2 hours, more people arrived, not soldiers, though a small number of uniformed figures stood watch at a respectful distance, their expressions alert but not hostile. Instead, trucks rolled in carrying equipment I did not recognize, followed by individuals who moved with the confident, purposeful energy of people who understood machinery. A woman introduced herself as Molly Ashcroft, though she looked younger than most of the others gathered around the crash site, barely more than a child by the standards of her own species, if my read on her physical development was accurate. She carried a case of tools slung over one shoulder and approached our damaged hull without a trace of hesitation, crouching down to examine a torn section of plating, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "This is incredible," she said, mostly to herself, running her fingers along a seam in the metal. "The way this is layered, it's nothing like anything I've studied. Can I look inside?" The captain hesitated, glancing at me. I understood her concern immediately. Allowing strangers access to the interior of our ship meant exposing systems, technology, secrets that had taken generations to develop. If this species turned out to be less friendly than they currently appeared, we would be handing them exactly the kind of information that could be used against us. But we also had no functioning engines, no fabricators capable of producing the parts we needed, and no way to leave this planet without help. The choice, uncomfortable as it was, had already been made for us by the wreckage surrounding us. "Limited access," the captain finally said. "Engineering sections only, nothing involving weapons or navigation systems." I led Molly and two other engineers, a man named Callum Reeve and another named Owen Bramwell, into the damaged sections of the ship, watching carefully as they examined torn conduits and cracked support beams. I expected confusion, perhaps frustration at technology far beyond their understanding. Instead, I watched something closer to delight spread across their faces as they worked. "This alloy," Callum said, tapping gently on a section of hull plating. "It's incredibly light for how strong it clearly needs to be. What's the composition?" I gave him a general answer, careful not to reveal proprietary details, but even the vague explanation seemed to spark a flood of questions. What temperatures could it withstand? How was it manufactured? Could it be layered with other materials for additional strength? I found myself answering question after question, surprised at how quickly these humans grasped concepts I expected would take them far longer to understand. By the time evening fell, more people had arrived, along with something I did not expect at all. A woman moved through the crowd carrying a tray of small cups, offering them to anyone who looked tired, cold, or simply present. When she reached our group, she held one out toward me with an expectant smile. "Coffee," Derek explained, noticing my confusion. "Keeps you going. Try it." I lifted the cup carefully, sniffing the dark liquid inside, uncertain whether it was meant as food, medicine, or some kind of test. The captain watched me closely, waiting to see what I would do before deciding whether to accept her own cup. I took a small sip, bracing for anything. The taste was bitter, sharp, unlike anything in our own rations, but not unpleasant. Within minutes, I felt a subtle sharpening of my thoughts, a fading of the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones since the battle. I looked at Derek with new curiosity. "This substance has stimulant properties," I said. "Is it safe for regular consumption?" He laughed, the sound warm and easy. "Depends who you ask. Around here, we drink it like it's the only thing keeping civilization running." By nightfall, engineers from what Derek called several nearby facilities had arrived, bringing equipment I did not recognize but which Callum and Molly seemed to understand instinctively. They worked alongside our own crew, translating measurements back and forth through the improving translator, building makeshift scaffolding around the worst sections of our damaged hull. I stood back at one point, watching Owen carefully cut away a section of warped metal using a tool that produced almost no heat, and it struck me how strange this entire situation was. We had crashed onto an unfamiliar world, expecting hostility, or at best, indifference. Instead, we had found a species eager to help, curious beyond anything I had encountered before, working through the night, without complaint, to fix a ship belonging to visitors they had known for less than a day. "You are not afraid of us," I said to Molly, unable to hold the question back any longer, as she adjusted a section of exposed wiring with careful precision. She looked up, considering the question seriously rather than dismissing it. "I mean, a little, maybe. But mostly I'm just excited. Do you know how long people have wondered if there was anyone else out there? And now you're just here, and your ship works completely differently than anything we've ever built, and I get to help fix it. It's like every question I've ever had is suddenly answerable. Her honesty surprised me. There was no calculation in her words, no hidden agenda that I could detect, just genuine wonder at the strangeness and possibility of the moment. I found myself, against every instinct my training had given me, beginning to relax slightly in her presence. As the repairs continued through the following days, I noticed something else. The humans did not simply fix what was broken. They studied it first, asked questions, tried to understand the reasoning behind our designs before suggesting changes. When Callum proposed an alteration to one of our damaged conduit systems, I initially rejected the idea, certain that our original design was superior. He did not argue. He simply asked if he could show me a small test first, using scrap material rather than risking anything critical. The test worked better than I expected. The modified conduit handled power fluctuations with noticeably less strain than our original design, something that should have been impossible from a species that had only encountered this technology days earlier. "How did you understand this so quickly?" I asked, genuinely troubled by how easily he had improved on centuries of Cathari engineering. Callum shrugged, wiping grease from his hands with a cloth. "Honestly, I don't know all the theory behind why your systems work the way they do. But I know a lot about managing stress and flow through material, even if it's not exactly like what we use back home. Sometimes it just takes looking at a problem from outside the assumptions everyone else has already made." That phrase stayed with me long after he said it. Outside the assumptions everyone else has already made. It was, I realized, precisely the kind of thinking my own people had lost somewhere along the way, buried beneath generations of tradition and established procedure. We built things the way they had always been built, refined slowly, cautiously, rarely questioning the fundamental designs passed down through countless engineers before us. These humans questioned everything, and more troubling still, they were often right to. Derek visited the crash site nearly every day, though his actual responsibilities clearly extended well beyond road maintenance once officials from what he called the government became involved. He brought updates, arranged for additional supplies, and seemed to genuinely enjoy watching the repair work unfold, even when he understood almost nothing of the technical conversation happening around him. "Your people back home," he asked me one evening, as we watched Molly and two other engineers debate the merits of a redesigned coolant system. "Are they going to come looking for you? Or the ones who did this to your ship, are they going to come looking too?" The question settled uncomfortably in my chest. I had been avoiding it, focused entirely on the immediate crisis of survival, of repair, of understanding this strange and generous species that had taken us in without hesitation. But Derek was right to ask. The Draython Compact had been tracking our convoy relentlessly before our jump. There was no guarantee they had lost our trail entirely. "It is possible," I admitted. "The ones who attacked us are persistent. If they discover our location, they may follow." Derek was quiet for a moment, watching the sparks fly from a welding tool nearby. "And if they do come here, what happens to us? To Earth, I mean." I did not have an easy answer for him. I only knew that the Draython Compact showed little mercy toward species without the means to defend themselves, and Earth, for all its warmth and generosity, possessed nothing close to the weapons or shields needed to survive an assault from ships built for conquest. "I do not know," I said honestly, "but I believe, if that day comes, we owe you more than silence and worry. You have given us everything, without asking what it might cost you." Derek studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading evening light. Then he smiled, small and tired, but genuine. "Then I guess we'll figure it out together when the time comes." That's usually how the best solutions happen anyway. I did not know, standing there beside my crippled ship in the cooling evening air, just how soon that time would arrive, or how completely this quiet promise between two strangers from different worlds would come to define everything that followed. 3 weeks passed before I truly understood what we had stumbled into by crashing on this particular world. The repairs to the silent current had progressed far beyond what I ever expected in such a short time. What began as patching torn hull plating had grown into something much larger, as human engineers, driven by an appetite for problems that seemed almost boundless, began proposing improvements to systems that had worked perfectly well, if unremarkably, for generations. I stood in the main engineering bay one morning, watching Callum and Owen run diagnostics on our shield emitter array, a system I had personally maintained for the last 6 years of my service. Numbers scrolled across their borrowed display screen, numbers that made no sense to me at first, because they were better than anything the original design had ever produced. "Explain this," I said, pointing to a projected efficiency rating that sat well above anything I had recorded before the crash. Owen grinned, clearly proud of himself. "We noticed your emitters were pulsing at a fixed interval, probably to conserve power evenly across the array. But if we stagger the pulse timing slightly, based on some work we've done with our own power grids, you get better coverage using less energy overall. It's not a huge difference in theory, but across a whole ship, it adds up fast." I checked the numbers myself, running the calculations twice, because I did not trust them the first time. He was right. The modification increased shield efficiency by nearly a third, an improvement that should have taken our own research divisions years to develop, if they ever managed it at all. "You changed the fundamental function of Cathari shield technology in an afternoon," I said slowly. "I mean, we had help," Owen said, gesturing toward Callum. "And honestly, we just borrowed some ideas from how we manage our own electrical systems. Your tech is way more advanced than ours in almost every way. We just noticed one spot where a small tweak made a big difference." I did not respond right away, because I was too busy reconsidering everything I thought I understood about this species. When we first arrived, I had assumed, the way most Cathari would assume, that a civilization without interstellar travel was simply behind us, a step on a ladder we had already climbed. It was an easy assumption to make, comfortable and familiar, the kind of thinking that let us feel secure in our place among the stars. But watching Owen adjust our shield emitters, I began to understand something far more unsettling. These humans were not behind us. They were simply different, shaped by different challenges, and in some ways, perhaps sharper for it. Where our engineers built cautiously within established boundaries, humans seemed to treat every boundary as an invitation to ask why it existed in the first place. This pattern repeated itself again and again over the following days. Our engine coils came back running hotter and more stable than before, thanks to a cooling method borrowed from something Callum called industrial refrigeration. Our navigation computer, once slow and prone to lag during rapid calculations, ran noticeably faster after Molly rewrote portions of its processing structure, applying techniques she had learned from something called computer science that I still did not fully understand. "You are 17 years old," I said to her one afternoon, watching her fingers move rapidly across a keyboard connected to our translator matrix. "How do you already possess this level of skill?" She laughed without looking up from her work. "I mean, I've been coding since I was maybe 10. It's not that unusual where I'm from. Lots of kids learn this stuff early if they're interested in it. Your society allows children access to technology capable of interfacing with alien systems," I said, still trying to reconcile this fact with everything else I had learned. "Sure, I mean, nobody expected aliens to show up, obviously, but computers are just part of normal life here. You'd be surprised how many people my age could probably do what I'm doing right now, if they had the chance." The translator matrix she had been working on chimed softly, indicating a successful update. Suddenly, the device that had once struggled through halting, imperfect exchanges began rendering conversation with startling clarity, catching nuance and tone that our original programming had missed entirely. "This is remarkable," I admitted, testing the improved system with a simple conversation, hearing my own words rendered into her language with far more precision than before. "Our own linguists spent months developing the original matrix. You improved upon it in an afternoon." Molly shrugged, though I could see she was pleased by the observation. "Different problem, different tools, I guess. You built something meant to work across a whole galaxy of different languages. I just needed it to work really well for one specific pair of languages. easier target. That explanation, simple as it sounded, revealed something important about how these humans approached problems. They did not always possess deeper knowledge than we did. Often, quite the opposite was true, and our technology remained centuries beyond anything Earth had independently developed. But their willingness to focus narrowly, to experiment freely, without fear of disrupting established tradition, allowed them to find improvements that our own more cautious, more structured approach had simply never considered. Derek arrived at the crash site later that week, accompanied by several officials I had not met before, their expressions serious in a way that immediately drew my attention. The captain met them near the ramp of our ship, and I followed close behind, sensing that whatever conversation was about to happen mattered a great deal. "We picked up something," Derek said, his easy manner replaced by something more guarded. "Our telescopes and satellites caught unusual activity at the edge of the system. Ships, moving in a pattern that doesn't match anything we've launched or tracked before." My chest tightened immediately. "How many ships?" One of the officials, a woman with sharp eyes and a folder of printed images tucked under her arm, stepped forward. "We counted at least a dozen distinct signatures. They're not close yet, still well beyond what we'd consider our immediate neighborhood, but they're moving in this direction, and they don't match the ship you already gave us data on." The captain and I exchanged a look heavy with understanding. The Drathon Compact did not send small scouting parties when they suspected valuable prey. A dozen ships suggested something far more organized, a hunting force sent specifically to track down what remained of our convoy and finish the destruction they had begun weeks earlier. "They found us," I said quietly. "How long until they arrive?" The captain asked, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from her posture. The official checked her notes. "Based on the speeds we're tracking, our best estimate is somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks, assuming they maintain their current course and pace." 5 weeks. I ran the numbers instantly in my head. Our ship, even with the remarkable progress made through human assistance, was still far from fully repaired. Our weapons systems remained offline. Our shields, while improved, existed only in partial functionality across limited sections of the hull. We were nowhere close to ready for a confrontation with a force of that size. "We need to leave," I said, turning to the captain. "Immediately, if possible. Draw them away from this planet before they realize what they have found here." Derek's expression shifted, something firm and unexpected settling into his features. "Leave and go where, exactly? You said yourself your ship isn't ready. You'd be running with no weapons and half your system still broken. That's not a plan, that's just delaying the same outcome somewhere else." "It would keep this danger away from your world," I said. "You have already given us more than we had any right to ask. We will not repay that generosity by bringing an invading fleet to your doorstep." "With respect," Derek said, and there was an edge in his voice I had not heard from him before, steady but unmistakably firm. "That ship isn't going anywhere fast enough to outrun a dozen warships. If they're tracking you, they'll follow you wherever you go, and eventually they'll catch you somewhere with a lot less help than you've got right here." I opened my mouth to argue, but the woman with the folder spoke first, her tone measured and careful. "There's another option, if you're willing to consider it. We've been studying your technology for weeks now, not just fixing what was broken, but genuinely understanding how it works. If we had access to more of your ship's specifications and enough time to prepare, it's possible we could do more than just repair the silent current." "What are you suggesting?" the captain asked slowly. The woman glanced at Derek before answering, as though seeking some final confirmation before committing to the idea aloud. "We're suggesting that instead of running, we build something capable of standing here, ready for whatever's coming, not just fixing your ship, but building more like it, adapted with what we've already learned. It's ambitious, I know, but 5 weeks is enough time to at least try, if everyone's willing to work together." The suggestion hung in the air between us, audacious in a way that struck me as almost impossible to believe. Building warships in 5 weeks, from a species that had never before encountered materials or technology remotely close to what our vessel represented, seemed less like a plan and more like desperate fantasy. And yet, I thought of Owen's shield modifications, of Molly's translator improvements, of Callum's understanding of stress and flow gained from nothing more than instinct and curiosity applied to an unfamiliar problem. I thought of engineers who questioned everything, who saw boundaries not as limits but as invitations, who had improved centuries of Cathari engineering within days of first encountering it. Perhaps, I realized slowly, 5 weeks was not as impossible a timeline as it first appeared, not for a species like this one. "If we do this," the captain said carefully, studying each face in front of her, "you understand the danger you would be inviting onto your world. The Drathon Compact does not show mercy to those who resist them. If we fail, the consequences will fall on all of us, not just my crew." Derek looked back at her without hesitation, and something in his steady gaze reminded me of the very first moment we met, standing amid the smoke of our crashed ship, a stranger offering help before anyone had even asked for it. "Then I guess we'd better not fail," he said simply. "Where do we start?" What followed those 5 weeks tested every assumption I had ever held about the limits of what a species without interstellar experience could accomplish. Within 2 days of the meeting at the crash site, Derek returned with more officials, engineers, and a proposal that made even the captain hesitate. The humans wanted to convert an old shipbuilding facility near the coast, normally used for constructing large ocean vessels, into a temporary shipyard capable of producing something entirely new. None of them had ever built a spacecraft before. None of them had access to the materials our own technology relied upon. What they did have was raw manufacturing capacity on a scale that startled me. Cranes and factories and skilled workers accustomed to building enormous structures quickly and precisely. "We can't replicate everything about your ship," Callum admitted, standing beside me as we toured the empty shipyard for the first time, our footsteps echoing across acres of open concrete. "Your alloys, your core technology, that's centuries beyond anything we can produce from scratch in 5 weeks. But we don't need to replicate everything, we just need enough." "Enough for what, exactly?" I asked. "Enough to fight," he said simply. "You've got working weapon schematics buried in your ship's systems, even if the actual weapons themselves got destroyed in the crash. If you can share those designs, and we can figure out how to build functional versions using materials we already have access to, even scaled-down versions, we might be able to put together something that gives those Drathon ships a real fight instead of an easy massacre." I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of naive overconfidence in his expression, but found none. Callum understood exactly how difficult the task ahead of him truly was. He simply did not consider it impossible. The next weeks blurred together into an exhausting, exhilarating rhythm of work that left little room for rest. I spent most of my waking hours transferring what technical knowledge I safely could to teams of engineers, watching them absorb concepts that should have taken years of study within days, adapting our designs to materials and manufacturing methods available on Earth. The captain, meanwhile, worked directly with military officials, people whose careful, measured questions revealed depths of strategic thinking I had not expected from a species still confined to a single planet. General Priestley, an older woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, spent hours reviewing our ship's original battle records, extracting lessons from every engagement, every failure, every narrow escape. "Your people fight like you build," she observed one evening, reviewing footage of an old Cathari engagement against Drathon forces. "Cautious, methodical, reluctant to deviate from established tactics even when the situation clearly calls for it." "Is that a criticism?" I asked, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. She smiled faintly, not unkindly. "It's an observation. Caution has kept your people alive this long, clearly. But caution alone won't win a fight against an enemy who already knows exactly how you're going to react before you do it. We're going to need some unpredictability if we want any real advantage." I found myself, more often than I expected, agreeing with her assessment. Molly, meanwhile, had taken on a role I never anticipated, coordinating communication between dozens of engineering teams scattered across the makeshift shipyard, ensuring that discoveries made in one section reached every other team working on related systems. Her improved translator matrix had become essential, allowing Cathari and human engineers to exchange complex technical concepts with a fluency that would have been impossible only weeks earlier. "You're basically running half the operation now," I told her one exhausted evening, watching her juggle 3 separate conversations happening simultaneously across different workstations. She laughed, though clear fatigue colored the sound. "I'm mostly just making sure nobody duplicates work that someone else already finished 3 buildings over. Somebody has to keep track of it all. Might as well be me." The first completed weapon prototype fired successfully during the 3rd week, a scaled-down version of our standard plasma emitters, built using an alloy combination Owen and his team had developed after dozens of failed attempts. It lacked the raw power of our original Cathari designs, but it worked, and more importantly, human factories could produce dozens of them within days rather than the months our own manufacturing processes typically required. "It's not as strong as what you had before the crash," Owen admitted, watching the test results scroll across his screen with a mixture of pride and honest assessment. "But we can build a lot of them, fast, and honestly, sometimes numbers matter more than individual strength." I thought of General Priestley's words about unpredictability, about caution keeping us alive but rarely winning fights against enemies who already understood our patterns. Perhaps a fleet of numerous, slightly weaker weapons, deployed in ways the Draython Compact had never encountered before, might prove more dangerous than they expected. By the 4th week, the shipyard had transformed entirely. Where once stood empty concrete and idle cranes, now rose the skeletal frames of a dozen vessels, smaller than the silent current, but built with a speed that defied everything I understood about spacecraft construction. Human workers moved with tireless energy through day and night shifts, driven by an urgency that seemed to sharpen rather than exhaust them as the deadline drew closer. Derek visited nearly every day, though his role had shifted from simple coordinator to something closer to a symbol of the entire effort, walking the shipyard floor, checking in with exhausted workers, offering the same easy encouragement that had first drawn our crew to trust him. "You didn't have to keep coming here every day," I told him one night, finding him sharing coffee with a group of night shift workers near one of the half-finished hulls. "You have other responsibilities." "Nothing more important than this," he said simply, handing me a cup without asking if I wanted one, a habit I had quietly grown to appreciate over the weeks. "Besides, someone's got to make sure everyone remembers to eat and sleep occasionally. People get so focused on solving the next problem, they forget they're human. No offense." I took a sip of the coffee, the bitter warmth settling familiar and welcome after weeks of exhausting work. "None taken, though I confess, I no longer fully understand the distinction you are drawing." He laughed, tired but genuine. "Fair enough." The 5th week arrived with a warning that sent a cold shock through the entire operation. Satellite tracking, refined significantly since the initial detection weeks earlier, confirmed that the Draython fleet had accelerated their approach, cutting the estimated arrival time from what should have been another full week down to merely 3 days. The news reached me while I stood inside the half-completed frame of what would become the 7th vessel in our newly built fleet, examining a shield emitter installation alongside Callum and 2 of his colleagues. Molly delivered the update in person, her expression tight with barely controlled worry as she relayed the information through the translator. 3 days, she said. That's all we've got left. I closed my eyes briefly, running calculations I already knew would not favor us. 7 vessels completed, 4 more still under construction, weapons systems functional but far from fully tested, shield technology adapted but unproven in actual combat. Against a fleet of at least a dozen dedicated Draython warships, the numbers looked grim, regardless of how creatively we approached the confrontation. "We cannot complete the remaining ships in time," I said, opening my eyes to find Callum watching me with an expression I could not quite read. "No," he agreed, "but we can complete more than we thought possible 5 weeks ago, and that has to count for something. The captain called an emergency meeting that evening, gathering every senior figure involved in the effort, human and Cathari alike, crowded into a converted office space near the edge of the shipyard. Maps and diagrams covered every surface, showing projected fleet positions, weapon capabilities, defensive formations that General Priestley and her staff had spent the past weeks refining alongside our own tactical knowledge. 3 days isn't enough time to finish everything we planned, General Priestley said, addressing the room with the calm authority of someone accustomed to delivering difficult truths. But it is enough time to finish preparing what we already have. 7 completed vessels, plus the silent current, gives us 8 ships capable of combat. Not equal to what's coming, not in raw power, but we have advantages they won't expect. Such as? The captain asked. Home field advantage, for one, Priestley said. They're expecting to find a wounded convoy limping along, not an organized defense with weapons they've never encountered before, built from technology and tactics they know nothing about. Surprise counts for a great deal in warfare, more than most people realize until they're on the receiving end of it. I looked around the room, at exhausted engineers who had barely slept in days, at military officials calculating odds that remained uncomfortably slim despite every effort, at Derek standing quietly near the back, his presence steady even amid the mounting tension. Weeks earlier, none of these people had known aliens existed. Now they stood ready to fight and possibly die defending strangers who had crashed uninvited onto their world. Why are you doing this? I asked, the question escaping before I fully considered whether it was appropriate to voice aloud. You could have simply let us leave. Let the danger follow us elsewhere, away from your world entirely. Instead, you have spent 5 weeks building an entire fleet, risking everything, for a species you met by accident less than 2 months ago. The room fell quiet for a moment. It was Derek who finally answered, stepping forward from where he had been standing. Because that's not really how we work, he said simply. Somebody needed help. We happen to be the ones close enough to give it. Doesn't matter if you're from 3 streets over or from the other side of the galaxy. That's just what you do. I did not have an adequate response to that. In truth, I did not think one existed, not in any language I knew. The final 3 days passed in a blur of frantic preparation, weapons calibrated, shield systems tested one final time, crews assigned to vessels that had existed as nothing more than empty concrete only weeks earlier. Human volunteers, trained hastily but eagerly by our own crew members, filled positions aboard the new ships, learning unfamiliar controls with a speed that continued to astonish me even after everything I had already witnessed. On the final night before the Draython fleet's projected arrival, I found myself standing on the observation deck of the Silent Current, now fully repaired and running better than it had before the original battle that brought us to this world. Below, the makeshift shipyard buzzed with final preparations, lights blazing against the darkness as the last details were finalized before dawn. Derek joined me quietly, 2 cups of coffee in hand, offering one without comment as he had done so many times before. Scared? He asked, watching the activity below with the same steady calm he always carried. Yes, I admitted honestly. You? He considered the question seriously before answering. A little, maybe. Mostly just ready, though. Feels different when you've actually got something to fight with, instead of just waiting for whatever's coming. I thought of the 5 weeks behind us, of impossible progress achieved through nothing more than curiosity, generosity, and a stubborn refusal to accept that helping strangers wasn't worth the risk involved. Whatever happened when dawn broke and the Draython fleet finally arrived, I understood that we would face it together, and that fact alone offered more comfort than I expected possible only 2 months earlier. Whatever happens tomorrow, I said quietly, thank you, for everything, for a kindness I still do not fully understand, but one I will never forget. Derek smiled, tired but genuine, raising his cup slightly in a small, informal toast. Let's just make sure we're both around to keep not understanding it together. Above us, the stars remained calm and distant, giving no hint of the fleet drawing closer with every passing hour, unaware of the small, determined defense now waiting to greet them. The Draython fleet dropped out of jump space 6 hours ahead of every projection we had calculated, and the first warning I received was the sound of alarms tearing through the silent current before I had even finished my morning preparations. Contact. Orlan's voice cracked through the comm system, tight with urgency. 12 signatures, exactly where the models predicted, but they are early, very early. I abandoned everything and sprinted toward the bridge, my heart pounding harder with every step. Around me, the ship hummed with an energy I had not felt since before the crash. Systems fully restored, weapons finally live, shields humming at capacity for the first time since that desperate flight weeks earlier. It should have been reassuring. Instead, all I could think about was the 7 newly built human vessels still finishing final preparations, crews barely trained, weapons barely tested, facing an enemy that had arrived faster and more prepared than any of us anticipated. The captain stood at the center of the bridge when I arrived, her expression carved from something hard and steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. "Status of the fleet," she demanded. "All 8 vessels report ready," Orlan answered. "Human crews are in position. General Priestley is requesting battle formation instructions." "Give them what we discussed," the captain ordered. "Defensive crescent, silent current at the center. We let them come to us, on ground we chose, not ground they expected to find." I moved to my station, watching the tactical display fill with red markers representing the incoming Draython fleet. 12 ships arranged in the same aggressive spearhead formation I remembered from the battle that had crippled us weeks earlier. Against them, our own formation appeared painfully small, 8 ships arranged in a careful crescent, the silent current positioned at the heart of the defense with the 7 newly built human vessels spread across either flank. "They will assume the human vessels are weak," I said, studying the approaching fleet's trajectory. "Their formation shows no adjustment for an organized defense. They believe they are still hunting a wounded convoy. Then let's make sure that assumption costs them," the captain said grimly. The comm crackled, and Derek's voice came through, steady, despite the tension I could hear underneath it. He had insisted on taking a position aboard one of the new vessels, rather than remaining safely on the ground, a decision the captain had argued against fiercely before finally relenting. "Silent current, this is Fenwick Actual," he said, using the call sign assigned to his vessel. "We're in position and ready whenever you give the word." "Understood, Fenwick Actual," the captain replied. "Hold formation until they commit to an attack pattern. Do not engage prematurely." I watched the Draython fleet grow larger on our sensors, their ships sleek and predatory, built for exactly the kind of overwhelming assault that had nearly destroyed our original convoy. Every instinct I possessed screamed that we were still hopelessly outmatched, that 5 weeks of frantic effort, however remarkable, could not truly compensate for centuries of established Draython military dominance. And yet, watching the human crews hold their positions calmly across the tactical display, I found myself remembering something Callum had said during those exhausting weeks of preparation. Different problem, different tools. Perhaps we were not meant to fight this battle the way the Draython Compact expected, using their assumptions about weakness and predictability against them. The enemy fleet opened fire the moment they crossed into effective weapon range, exactly as their previous engagement with us had begun weeks earlier. Bright streaks of plasma tore across the space between our formations, and I braced myself for the devastating losses I feared were inevitable. But something unexpected happened. Where our original convoy had scattered defensively weeks earlier, panicked and disorganized under the sudden assault, our new formation held steady, shields absorbing the initial barrage with efficiency that clearly surprised the approaching fleet. The modified shield emitters Owen had designed, staggered and adaptive in ways our original Cathari technology had never employed, distributed incoming damage far more effectively than the Draython commanders anticipated. "Shields holding at 82% across the fleet," Orlan reported, disbelief coloring his voice. "They expected more damage than this." "Return fire," the captain ordered. "All vessels, target their forward line." What followed was unlike any battle I had witnessed in my years of service. The human crews, despite their inexperience, fought with a creative unpredictability that consistently disrupted the Drathon fleet's carefully coordinated tactics. Where established military doctrine would have called for maintaining strict formation, several of the new vessels broke pattern entirely, executing maneuvers that made no sense according to any strategic framework I understood, yet somehow consistently avoided the concentrated fire the Drathon commanders attempted to direct against them. "Fenwick Actual, report," the captain called, watching Derek's vessel execute a sharp, unpredictable turn that sent it curving beneath the main line of enemy fire. "We're good," Derek's voice came back, strained but confident. "Turns out flying like you've got nothing to lose makes you a lot harder to predict than flying like a trained fleet would. Priestley's crew figured that out about a week into training and never stopped using it." I watched the tactical display with growing amazement as our smaller, less powerful weapons, deployed in numbers our factories could produce rapidly, began overwhelming Drathon shield systems designed to withstand far fewer, far more powerful individual strikes. It was, I realized, precisely the kind of advantage General Priestley had described weeks earlier, unpredictability and volume compensating for what we lacked in raw individual strength. Still, the battle remained desperately close. Two of our newly built vessels sustained serious damage within the first 20 minutes, their crews fighting valiantly to keep systems functioning under sustained enemy fire. I gripped my console tightly, watching numbers shift and change too rapidly to fully process, aware that a single miscalculation, a single moment of hesitation, could still cost us everything we had built over the past 5 desperate weeks. "Dockrathon flagship is repositioning," Orlan warned suddenly. "They are targeting the silent current directly." The captain's expression hardened. "Of course they are. Take out the flagship, and they think the rest will fold." She turned toward me. "Vex, can our weapons handle a direct engagement with their command vessel?" I ran the calculations rapidly, comparing our restored systems against everything I remembered about Drathon flagship capabilities from our previous encounter. Possible, but difficult. Their flagship carries significantly stronger shields than the vessels we have engaged so far. "Then we need a distraction," the captain said, already reaching for the comm. "Fenwick Actual, and any vessels able to break formation safely, I need you to draw their support ships away from the flagship's flank. Can you manage that?" There was a brief pause before Derek's voice returned, and I could hear something new in his tone, sharp focus mixed with a kind of determined excitement. "Yeah, we can manage that. Just make sure you finish the job once we clear you a path." What followed was, even now, difficult for me to fully articulate. The 7 human vessels, working with a coordination that belied their limited training, executed a series of aggressive, unpredictable maneuvers that drew nearly half the Drathon support fleet away from their flagship's protective formation. It was reckless, dangerous, precisely the kind of maneuver our own cautious Cathari doctrine would have rejected as unnecessarily risky. It worked exactly as Derek promised. With the flagship's support scattered and distracted, the captain guided the silent current directly into the gap, weapons targeting concentrated fire against the enemy command vessel's weakened flank. I fed power continuously into our restored weapon systems, watching Drathon shields buckle under sustained, precise assault that their commanders had clearly never expected from what they still believed was a crippled, desperate convoy. The flagship's shields failed entirely 12 minutes later, followed swiftly by a cascading series of internal explosions that sent the massive vessel spiraling out of formation, clearly no longer capable of coordinated combat. Without their command ship directing the assault, the remaining Drathon vessels began showing signs of confusion, their previously coordinated attack pattern fracturing into disorganized, increasingly desperate individual engagements. "They are breaking formation," Orlan reported, excitement finally breaking through his professional composure. Multiple vessels retreating toward jump range. I watched the tactical display with something approaching disbelief. The 12-ship Drathon fleet that had arrived with such confident superiority now scattered and fleeing, harried by 8 vessels that should never have been able to withstand their assault, let alone force a full retreat. "Confirm retreat pattern," the captain ordered, though I could hear something almost like exhaustion mixed with quiet triumph in her voice. "Do not pursue beyond our defensive perimeter. Let them go." The remaining Draython ships vanished into jump space one by one, until finally the tactical display showed nothing but our own 8 vessels, damaged but intact, holding formation against a sky finally empty of enemy signatures. For a long moment, silence filled the bridge, broken only by the quiet hum of restored systems and the distant sound of celebration beginning to rise from crews across the fleet. I found myself laughing, an unfamiliar sound that surprised even me, relief and disbelief tangled together into something I had no proper word for in any language I knew. The calm crackled once more, and Derek's voice returned, tired but unmistakably pleased. "Silent Current, this is Fenwick Actual. Can confirm, that felt a whole lot better than watching you guys get chased into our backyard 5 weeks ago." The captain allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the first I had seen from her in longer than I could remember. "Good work, Fenwick Actual. All vessels, return to shipyard for repairs and full damage assessment." In the hours that followed, as damaged vessels limped back toward the coastal shipyard and exhausted crews finally allowed themselves to feel the full weight of what they had accomplished, I found myself standing once more on the observation deck of the Silent Current, watching Earth's sun rise gently over a planet that remained, against every reasonable expectation, safe and unconquered. Derek joined me there eventually, moving slower than usual, a bandage wrapped around one forearm from some minor injury sustained during the chaos of battle. He held 2 cups of coffee, offering one to me with the same easy gesture that had become so familiar over the past 2 months. "We did it," he said simply, settling beside me at the viewport. "You did far more than repair a broken ship," I said, accepting the cup gratefully. "You built an entire fleet from nothing, trained crews in weeks who fought as though they had trained for years, and drove back an enemy that should have destroyed us all without difficulty. I do not fully understand how, even now, after everything I have witnessed." Derek considered this for a moment, watching the sunlight spread slowly across the shipyard below, illuminating scorched but standing vessels, exhausted but living crews. "Maybe it's simpler than you're making it," he said finally. "You needed help. We gave it. Turns out when you give people a real reason to fight for something and the tools to actually do it, they tend to surprise you." I thought of everything that had brought us to this moment, the desperate crash landing weeks earlier, the stranger who had offered help before we even asked, the teenager who rewrote our translator matrix in an afternoon, the engineers who improved centuries of Kethari technology within days simply by refusing to accept established limitations. None of it, viewed individually, seemed remarkable enough to explain the impossible victory we had just achieved. Yet together, woven into something larger than any single contribution, it had proven more than sufficient. "When my people receive word of what happened here," I said slowly, "I do not know how they will respond. Earth's location, your capabilities, everything we have witnessed here, it will change how the wider galaxy views this world entirely." Derek shrugged, though I could see he understood the weight of what I was suggesting. "Guess we'll handle whatever comes next the same way we handled this. One problem at a time, together, as long as anyone needs the help." Below us, across the shipyard, I could see crews beginning repairs on damaged vessels, human and Kethari engineers, working side by side without hesitation, the boundary between our 2 species already blurring into something closer to shared purpose than careful diplomatic distance. Whatever challenges awaited us beyond this single, desperate victory, I understood now that we would not face them alone. "Earth's open for repairs," Derek said, raising his cup slightly in that same small, informal toast he seemed to favor. "Tell your people that, when you finally get the chance." I raised my own cup in return, watching the sun climb fully above the horizon, casting warm light across a fleet that should not have existed, built by a species that should not have been able to build it, defending a world that had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, become something worth protecting with everything we had left to give. I will, I said, though I suspect, once they hear the full story, they will hardly believe a word of it. Derek laughed, the sound easy and genuine, carrying across the quiet morning air like the final note of a battle finally, truly finished. Yeah, he said, that tends to happen a lot around here.